You're listening to Campus Killings, brought to you by AbJack Entertainment. Be sure to check out some of the other great true crime podcasts from this network, including The Murder in My Family, Missing Persons, DNA ID, Scene of the Crime, Zodiac Speaking, Beyond Bizarre True Crime, Below the Surface, and Killer Communications. All of these podcasts are available for you to binge on right now, wherever you listen to podcasts. Subscribe where you're listening to this podcast so you don't miss an episode.
Hi, Meghan, and hello, listeners. Today's case was suggested by our listener, Matt E. He attended the University of Toledo a year after Melissa Herstrum's murder, and he recalls it being a very sad time for the university community. A big thank you for suggesting this case. We will have a lot to discuss about motive and the perpetrator later on, especially since Melissa's case came up a few years ago when her killer became eligible for parole. But before we get to that, let's go ahead and take a look at Matt's alma mater. While today the University of Toledo is a sprawling urban university with over 15,000 students, its beginnings were quite humble. Founded in 1972 as the Toledo University of Arts and Trades, it had 2 classrooms in the basement of a church with 1 professor and 26 students. Only 6 years later, it shut its doors from a lack of funds. But it wouldn't be until the city of Toledo stepped in around 1885 and turned it into a secondary school that it got any traction. By the turn of the century, it had grown large enough to return to higher education, and in the 1920s, the school rebranded as the University of Toledo, or UT, and it experienced such a major expansion in enrollments that they had to build a completely new campus. The growth continued into the 1930s despite the Great Depression, and by World War II, the university was thriving. During the war, the U.S. military contracted the university to create war training programs for civilians that included courses in engineering, science, and management. They were also the first university in the U.S. to have a Red Cross chapter, where students got together and knitted sweaters to send to the troops. And while the university had several financial issues over the 1950s and 60s, the school was thriving again by their centennial in 1972. And as we see many universities do, most of their modern history involved expanding programs, merging with other institutions to form healthcare systems, and joining the late 90s, early 2000s tech boom. Today, the university offers over 250 majors in a variety of disciplines, and even though they are the 6th largest university in Ohio, their class sizes are surprisingly intimate at only about 25 students. The school boasts private school professor-to-student ratios, but in a public institution. And while we don't know why a young woman named Melissa Herstrum chose the University of Toledo, we do know that she was a beloved student and a great friend. Born in Georgia on April 19, 1972, Melissa and her family moved at some point in her early life to Rocky River, Ohio. She grew up in a loving, close-knit home with her parents and her sister, Cindy. As we see in many of the students we cover on this show, Melissa was a very involved teenager by the time she got to high school. She made the cheerleading team her sophomore and senior years, and she also sang in the school choir all 4 years. Melissa also loved water sports and spent a lot of time sailing and boating with her family, as well as fishing and skiing. She was also an excellent student, and even at such a young age, Melissa knew that she wanted to do something with her life that would help people, and she believed that becoming a nurse was the answer. She started volunteering at Fairview General Hospital and enrolled in UT's nursing program with the goal of working for Fairview Hospital upon completing her bachelor's in nursing. One of her UT friends, TJ McManaman, described her as one of the nicest, most selfless people he had ever met. So he wasn't surprised that she wanted to go into a career in nursing. During her freshman year, she pledged to Pi Beta Phi sorority and moved into the sorority house during her sophomore year so that she could spend as much time with her friends as possible. By all accounts, Melissa was an extremely fun person to be around. She loved celebrating Thanksgiving and Christmas with her family, and her sister Cindy remembers what a great laugh Melissa had. Melissa wanted to get married and have a family, something that both TJ and Cindy knew that she would be great at because she loved other people so much.
Plus, she was seemingly great at everything. That is the tragedy of this show that we cover. So many of the kids first of all, we are always covering like kids, and so many of them were so promising, just had so much of a future in front of them.
But tragically, Melissa would never live to reach any of her goals. In the early morning of January 27, 1992, UT police received a strange call from the local checker cab company. An anonymous person had called the company's main line reporting that 3 unidentified Black men had been seen approaching one of the company's cars in Lot 23 on UT's campus. And only a few seconds later, shots were fired. Why the call had gone to the cab company and not directly to UT police was a mystery. But 2 officers, Jeff Gasarowski and Jeffrey Hodge, were dispatched to check out the situation. To no one's surprise, when they arrived, there was no shot-out cab or bullet casings. In fact, it was just an empty parking lot. But just to be sure, they did a foot patrol around the area, and only a few feet away from the edge of the parking lot, Jeffrey Hodge alerted that he had found the body of a young woman.
I'm so confused. So there was a call about a cab shooting, and really there was no cab, but it was Melissa's body.
That is correct.
Okay.
This young woman was found face down without a coat, and she had been shot in her back, legs, arms, and head.
Ugh.
It was also apparent that she had been deceased for several hours as her body was completely frozen to the ground. The officers alerted Toledo's police homicide unit, and the young woman's body was transported to the morgue for an autopsy. Initial investigations found an abandoned car on the side of the road not far from campus. Inside was a wallet with a university ID for Melissa Herstrum, and the photo matched the poor woman in the snow. But whoever had abducted her from her car and shot her multiple times in one of UT's remote parking lots was completely unknown.
And now, a brief word from our sponsors.
Police interviewed Melissa's sorority sisters first, as she had been hanging out with them until around 4 a.m. on the 26th. When asked if they knew anyone who wanted to harm her, they said no one, at least no one that they knew of. She wasn't dating anyone at the time, and she was a really gregarious person with a big heart. Everyone she encountered immediately liked her. They just couldn't imagine that anyone would want to harm her. So they tried to find out if maybe she had a secret lifestyle that would put her in harm's way. But it turned up nothing. Melissa lived an uncomplicated life. She went to class, volunteered at the hospital on weekends, hung out with her friends, and visited with her parents on the weekends. This was not the kind of person who had enemies, which meant that it would be up for the autopsy to provide a path forward.
So what does the autopsy show? You said she was shot several times. I'm very curious here.
By several, we're talking 14 close-range shots, and that's in her back, her legs, and 1 shot to the back of the head.
What?
Yeah. The order in which she was shot was unclear, so it couldn't be determined if she had been alive for most of the assault. Bullets were collected from her body and the surrounding scene, and they were determined to be from a 9mm, and one was disfigured in a way that suggested it had hit something hard and then ricocheted. Her wrists also bore the distinctive marks of having been restrained with a pair of handcuffs. It was absolutely brutal, and it seemed to be an extremely personal murder.
Amy, it's so odd. 14 shots? It almost sounds like she was running. Or, you know what I mean? Or like caught in like some type of shootout or something. I
but
don't
why
know.
the handcuff marks? I think that's where where it seems that doesn't fit.
So I'm thinking someone, I don't know, but I'm thinking someone handcuffed her and then she got away possibly and then they shot her.
Yeah,
that's
possible.
Okay.
I will tell you there were no signs of sexual assault.
Okay. I was going to ask that next.
So it's clear, again, like I said, this was brutal and it seemed to be extremely personal, but the who remained elusive. As detectives worked around the clock to find a lead, the Herstroms and all of Melissa's friends had the horrendous task of grieving her and laying her to rest. UT hosted a memorial for her the day following the murder, where hundreds of students and faculty and staff came to share stories and light candles in her memory. In the days following, a few campus police officers checked up on Melissa's sorority sisters to ask some follow-up questions. Though their rookie officer, Jeffrey Hodge, was asking more than questions, he offered condolences and wanted to make sure that Melissa's friends were okay. Though to some this may have seemed like a kind gesture, one of Melissa's sorority sisters would later say that she found the behavior very odd. And she wasn't the only one. The lead homicide investigator, Thomas Gulch, had been noticing a pattern emerge as more evidence came to light. For one, the bullets taken from Melissa's body matched those from another incident that occurred at UT only a week prior.
What? They had another murder?
Not a murder, but on January 20th, several mysterious gunshots had been fired into one of the women's dormitories, narrowly missing one woman who slept in her bed.
Oh, my goodness.
Now, what was interesting to, again, the lead homicide investigator, Thomas Gulch, was that the UT officer who had been first on the scene was their rookie cop, 22-year-old Jeffrey Hodge.
Oh, my God.
In addition, the UT police all used 9mm handguns as their duty weapon.
Well, I see where you're going with this. Oh, my goodness. Okay.
So Gulch found it just a little suspicious that bullets from the scene were the same in both crimes, and young Jeffrey had been the first cop on both scenes.
Oh, boy.
Then, finding out that he was spending a lot of time at Melissa's sorority house afterwards, that's when Gulch's eyes turned squarely on the young officer. And Gulch's suspicions only deepened when his detectives traced the original anonymous call to the Checker Cab Company about that alleged, quote, robbery. Get this, it came from inside UT, from a phone that's only accessible to the janitorial staff and the UT police.
Oh, boy.
Furthermore, data logs show that Jeffrey Hodge had patrolled the area that the phone was located in around the same time that that call was placed. Lastly, Jeffrey had also been working the night shift when Melissa was murdered.
Are you going to tell us more about his background?
Yeah, I will tell you what I know for sure.
All right.
So how interesting, Detective Gulch thought, that Jeffrey Hodge seemed to keep showing up at exactly the right place at the right time. So he and one of his detectives went to visit Jeffrey at the precinct to talk to him and see if they could get any information.
Mm-hmm.
While he spoke about the initial investigation, Gulch's partner noticed that one of the handcuff sets on Jeffrey's belt looked dirty and beat up. And one side even appeared dented, despite the rest of the equipment on Jeffrey's belt appearing to be shiny and new.
Okay.
While they talked to Jeffrey, a separate team forensically dusted the police cruiser he had used the night of Melissa's murder, and they recovered several strands of long brunette hair.
Oh, my goodness.
Now, this was certainly enough for Gulch to put Jeffrey in a formal interview. And to Gulch's shock, not only did Jeffrey agree to talk, but when he was blatantly asked if he had killed Melissa, he readily answered yes.
What?
Yes.
This is such a bizarre... Okay. What's going on here?
So he explained that he had been out on patrol that night and claimed that he watched Melissa's car commit a traffic violation. Now, there's no clear account of what that violation actually was or if it even existed at all. But we do know that he pulled her over and asked if she had been drinking. And she hadn't. But when she reached into her wallet, she realized she had left her license at home at the sorority house. Jeffrey said it wasn't an issue, that he would simply drive her back to her apartment so she could get her license. He would run it, and then he would take her back to her car.
Oh.
She agreed. And this is sad because we're taught to trust authority.
I know.
And, you would think as a woman alone at night by yourself, that's a safe place to go, is in a patrol car. But
And especially in the
wasn't
time
safe.
frame, we at least question, I think, authority a little bit differently now. But with the time you're talking about, I mean, yeah, most people would have said, okay.
Yeah. After she came back with her license, he didn't drive her to her car, however. He went to the remote commuter parking lot by UT's science building. From there, he claimed he blacked out and had no memory of what happened next.
Oh,
Despite heavy interrogation, Gulch could not get Jeffrey to give a motive at all. But after several hours of interview time, the lead detective had his own theory. He later told the press that he believed whatever conversation had occurred between Jeffrey and Melissa on that car ride back to her car triggered Jeffrey's behavior. Now, Jeffrey was obsessed with being a police officer, and he would have done anything to avoid losing his badge. So, perhaps if Jeffrey had pressured Melissa, maybe for a sexual encounter on the ride, and maybe she threatened to report him to Gulch, it was not out of the realm of possibility that Jeffrey had to resort to murdering her so she wouldn't speak. I mean, this may be true, it may not be true, but what Gulch didn't know at the time was that another UT student had had a chilling run-in with Jeffrey Hodge. I feel like we covered another case in which there was a campus security officer who was responsible.
we did.
Right? Like not too long ago?
Yes, we did cover another case as well. I'm even more perplexed about the motive here. But you're going to tell me more, so.
I'll tell you what I know, yes. Anna Holt was a junior at UT at the time of Melissa's murder. She had attended the memorial, though she hadn't personally known Melissa, and Anna and hundreds of other UT students felt vulnerable, nervous, and anxious while they waited for news of an arrest. So when she was watching the evening news a week after Melissa's murder and Jeffrey Hodge's arrest was announced, it should have brought her a sigh of relief. Instead, she felt sick and horrified because that same UT campus officer had pulled her over only 24 hours before he had murdered Melissa. In a similar situation to Melissa, Anna had been out with friends until 2 a.m. on January 25th, 1992. She got back to campus around 2:15 and parked near UT's Glass Bowl Stadium to wait for her boyfriend. The two had a planned date night for a late-night breakfast at the local Denny's. But only seconds after pulling in, a UT cop car appeared and parked directly behind her so that she couldn't leave. The officer who came up to her window was Jeffrey Hodge.
Mm-hmm.
But Anna was confused. She hadn't been speeding, she hadn't drank any alcohol, and she certainly hadn't been driving erratically. She rolled her window down a few inches and asked why she was being pulled over. But Jeffrey never answered. He just kept asking her where she had been, what she had been doing, and why she was out so late. So she told him the truth. She was waiting for her boyfriend, and only a minute later, her boyfriend pulled into the parking lot next to her car. Anna says that as soon as Jeffrey saw the headlights of an incoming car, he went back to his cruiser and quickly drove away.
Oh, she got very lucky.
Mm-hmm. At the time, she thought it was creepy, but figured Jeffrey was, maybe just a little overenthusiastic about his job. She didn't think much of it.
Right.
But after seeing his face on the news, her mind began to race. What if her boyfriend hadn't arrived when he did? What if she rolled down her window all the way? What if she was asked to get out of the car? How close had she been to becoming Jeffrey's victim?
Mm-hmm.
It's very likely Anna wasn't the only young woman to ask these questions, as following the arrest announcement, dozens of female students showed up to the UT police headquarters to lodge complaints against Jeffrey for inappropriate behavior.
We'll return after a brief word from our sponsors.
So, according to the reports, he harassed many young women in a similar manner to Anna, but they all brushed it off as strange or creepy until they saw him on the news. So I think probably it didn't escalate to criminal behavior, but it was enough to creep them out. It wasn't until they saw him on the news that they thought back and they were like, oh, this is that guy. I need to report this. And while Detective Gulch still believed that Jeffrey was triggered by either being sexually refused or threatened of being reported, Ohio journalist Mike Jones, who covered the case from the beginning, disagrees. Jones states that a murder of such personal brutality could not have been an overreaction to a slight, especially since Jeffrey had no prior criminal history and he had passed the psych test to become a police officer. He was also recently married and had what Jones referred to as a Boy Scout-like background. So to Jones, shooting 14 bullets into the back of a woman who was handcuffed and lying in the snow, it seemed far too barbaric to have happened over a disagreement on a car ride, even if it had been about sex.
I'm kind of leaning towards him, but I have a theory, but I'm going to wait till the end.
Okay. Also, I think if it was about sex, I think he would have sexually assaulted her and there was no evidence of a sexual assault. Or maybe he got scared off and ran away.
Mm-hmm.
But the more investigators picked away at Jeffrey Hodge, the more they revealed a pattern of deviant behavior.
Okay.
As we always say, just because someone doesn't have a criminal history, that doesn't mean that they don't have a history of criminal behavior or deviant behavior.
Right. Just means they hadn't been caught yet.
Yes. In addition to the complaints of inappropriate car stops from female students, UT police realized that several strange campus crimes had actually been created by Jeffrey. Along with the bizarre dormitory shooting only a few days before Melissa's murder, the campus also endured several strange fires and a bomb threat to the president's office. And guess who was the first officer in every single case?
Right. Got it.
This is almost like when people do things because they want to be the hero, so they create the problem.
Right.
With some people hypothesize that was why Lucy Letby did what she did. I remember that coming up a lot.
Right. This becomes a motive in healthcare serial killers.
Mm-hmm.
Like creating like a situation which they can become the hero.
Yes. And retrospectively, UT police realized that he had been creating crimes for himself to respond to. So clearly, Jeffrey had a pattern of disturbing behaviors. They also have this taped confession, but it was still a very circumstantial case. Gulch needed some hard evidence to confirm that there was no possibility that anyone else could have killed Melissa. And we're talking about 1992. DNA was still in its infancy. But luckily, investigators were able to send skin and hair samples taken from Jeffrey's police cruiser and also the handcuffs. They were sending these items to the lab.
Right.
And they did come back with a genetic signature that closely matched Melissa. But again, at the time, DNA was at a different point, and this was not considered proof beyond a reasonable doubt, the way that DNA today might be able to.
Right.
And the investigators were never able to find Jeffrey's service weapon. Without the murder weapon and without a definitive motive for the prosecution to base their case on, the state feared that the DNA would be more of a liability to a trial than of help. And again, this is because the science was so new that it wasn't really accepted as viable by the courts. So on cross-examination, it could have gotten, the evidence could have gotten scrutinized.
But they have the confession. And I mean, even though we dispute confessions now, I think confessions were viewed as more of a gold standard then.
Yeah, that's true. But also the other thing with presenting the DNA evidence that wasn't totally validated yet by the courts is Hodge could have maybe appealed his conviction on the grounds of it being used later. Or, so I think it was just a little too much of a liability for the prosecution.
Okay.
So the safest way to make sure that Jeffrey Hodge went to prison would be, of course, to offer a plea deal.
Right.
Because this would guarantee a prison sentence without the possibility of an appeal. Ohio had the death penalty in the 90s, and lead detective Gulch pushed the prosecution to charge Hodge with a capital offense. But obviously, a plea would take death penalty off of the table. So that left life without parole or 30 to life. And because the evidence at that time was considered circumstantial, Hodge agreed to plead out to 30 to life. Melissa's family was not happy about this.
Right.
Melissa's murder had been extensively brutal, and they didn't want Hodge to have any possibility of parole.
Of course not.
But the prosecutors believed that the risk of going to trial was too great, so the family negotiated that they would agree to the plea if Jeffrey confessed in front of them at his sentencing.
That's very interesting.
Mm-hmm. And he agreed to do this, which is a smart move. Possibility of parole, that's huge. He probably would have done anything to get that.
Yeah.
Especially because this went from a capital murder to life without parole. Like there was a lot on the table here.
Yeah.
On May 6 of 1993, Jeffrey Hodge pled guilty to kidnapping and murdering Melissa Herstrum and told her family what had transpired prior to her death. It was a chilling confession, particularly in light of the fact that Jeffrey had not only made sure to get to the murder scene first in order to contaminate the evidence, he also walked over his own snow prints.
Does he give a motive for this now? Is he going to tell why, or is he still saying he blacked out?
He had little to say as to his motive. Something else I want to point out about him, he had attended the university's memorial service for Melissa, and he stood guard over her sorority house in the days following the murder because he was providing extra protection to her sisters. Because at the time, people were scared. They didn't know it was a targeted crime.
Right.
Other reports also revealed that he requested to be present for her autopsy. And when the judge asked him why he had done this horrific crime, his only answer was, "I don't know. There is no reason."
Hey.
But while Hodge had little to say on his motives, Melissa's family did not hold back during their victim impact statements. For starters, Melissa's father, Alan, opened his remarks by telling Jeffrey that he suffered a near-fatal heart attack in December of '92, which was directly caused by the stress and grief of his daughter's murder. His doctors informed him that the heart attack was so severe it would take 10 to 20 years off the end of his life.
Oh my gosh.
So Jeffrey's depraved actions had not only robbed Alan of his daughter, but had also taken dozens of years off his own life. Alan concluded his remarks by telling Jeffrey, quote, "You do not deserve to live. We only agreed to this negotiated plea because it is important for us to hear you publicly confess that you are the kidnapper and the murderer." Melissa's sister, Cindy, went next, telling Jeffrey that she would never get to watch Melissa graduate college, become a nurse, or hold her future children, and not because of an accident or a disease, but because Jeffrey had decided to kill her. Melissa's mother, Diane, went last, and her words were the most haunting. Quote, "Instead of seeing her receive a college diploma, I will be watching her friends graduate without her. When I should have been dreaming of how we would choose her wedding dress, I was living the immediate nightmare of choosing a burial site and a casket."
Oh, it's so horrible.
And the Herstrums were not alone in their grief because Jeffrey Hodge hadn't just confessed to murder in front of them. He had also confessed in front of his own family who were in attendance to support him at the courthouse. His family was absolutely shocked and horrified that he had committed something so heinous. His mother remarked to the room that, quote, "It is beyond our understanding how this tragedy could have happened, because the Jeffrey Hodge that is known and loved by his family and friends is a nonviolent person incapable of committing such a crime." Jeffrey's young wife, a UT graduate herself, reportedly sobbed through the entire proceeding and left with his family without looking back.
Poor kids.
Jeffrey Hodge was officially sentenced to 30 years to life and was moved to the Marion Correctional Institution to begin serving his time. But while he was behind bars and Melissa had been laid to rest, the trauma caused by Jeffrey Hodge would ripple throughout UT for years to come.
And now, a brief word from our sponsors.
The fact that Jeffrey Hodge had been a campus police officer and used his authority to commit murder created immense distrust of the rest of UT's police for several years. A former RA from the time recalled that RAs often relied on the campus police for dorm emergencies, and prior to Melissa's murder, it had been a great relationship. However, following her murder, most students felt so shocked and betrayed by what Hodge was capable of that it shattered their trust with the rest of the officers for years. And many questioned if Hodge had been able to pass the psych test to get to the job, and then he kidnapped and murdered a student. What were the other officers capable of? Should they have passed their psych tests or not? This was a question that plagued the Herstrums so much so that they sued UT in a wrongful death suit.
Mm-hmm.
The suit claims that, quote, "The Herstrums could not believe that there wasn't something the university could have done in terms of knowing that Jeffrey Hodge was demented, and dispositions taken in the case showed that Hodge had been allowed to drive a patrol car alone after only a few weeks of his hiring," end quote. This was not an abnormal practice for 1992, because often police officers had their own car pretty quickly after being hired. So this particular part is not necessarily a sign of negligence.
Mm-hmm.
However, the disposition also cited that another campus officer reported to his superiors that he witnessed Hodge making a false report, but the administration took no disciplinary action against Hodge. Now, this convinced the family that Hodge was poorly supervised during his probationary period, and that his supervisors should have known that he had a, quote, super cop complex.
Uh-huh.
Ultimately, UT settled with the family for $1 million with a clause in the settlement stating that UT would publicly oppose any future parole releases for Hodge. I can't think of another case where I heard that part of a civil settlement was that a university had to publicly oppose future parole release. That's an interesting tidbit.
I've never heard that either.
They also agreed to create a memorial to Melissa, which would be called the Melissa Ann Herstrum Place. It had a rock bearing a name plaque by a picturesque seating area between Parks Towers, the Glass Bowl, and the McComas Village, and this was dedicated to her memory in 1994. Up until 2013, the university also had the Melissa Herstrum Scholarship, though I couldn't find whether or not it was still actively being awarded.
Okay.
And while there are no public records stating that the university changed any policies or procedures around their campus safety, there have been no on-campus murders since 1992. So if the school has made any private changes, they seem to be working. The Herstrums also won a $20 million judgment against Hodge in 1998 that barred him from making any money off of Melissa's murder should he ever be interviewed for a biography, a movie, or a documentary about the case.
Good.
And that would be where our story would normally end, but recall, Hodge was not sentenced to life without parole, which meant that he would eventually sit before a parole board. Melissa's friend TJ told the media that when Hodge was sentenced in 1993, 30 years felt like a really long time.
Mm-hmm.
But when he got the news that Hodge was up for early parole for good behavior in 2021, he realized that another 30 years wasn't long enough to be justice. For her parents and sister, knowing that they'd have to relive Melissa's murder in order to give their statements to the parole board completely shattered the progress that they had made in processing their grief. And for UT graduate Anna Hulse, the young woman who had potentially narrowly escaped a similar fate to Melissa, she told the press that she would be terrified if Hodge got out of prison. She explained to the media that she'd been lucky to have had 30 years of a beautiful life, while Melissa's ended at only 19 years old, and Hodge was the reason.
Mm-hmm.
If the tables had been turned, maybe Anna wouldn't be alive today. It's something she thinks about often, and she fears that Hodge would kill again if given the opportunity. And she certainly was not the only UT alum who felt that way. Melissa's family and friends created a letter-writing campaign called Melissa Forever, asking anyone who had known her or Hodge to send letters to the Ohio Parole Board urging them to deny his parole. And the community came out in force, sending over 400 letters to the Ohio Parole Board citing their concerns over Hodge's potential release. And as promised, the university also sent a letter. Remember, in the civil suit agreement.
Right.
And both prosecutors and several detectives who had worked the case also sent in letters urging the parole board to keep Hodge incarcerated. Detective Gulch, who was the lead detective on the case, who was now retired, cited that he believed that Hodge was a psychopath and would have become a serial killer if he hadn't been caught. Do you think so? Given that he was escalating, and it's hard to say, but
Yeah,
he
no,
definitely had some signs.
He would have been a career criminal.
So what do you think? Do you think he got parole after all those letters?
No.
No, he did not. And the parole board gave the following reasons. For one, he committed his offenses while acting as an on-duty law enforcement officer, so that violated public trust. His victim was vulnerable and defenseless, and evidence proved that Melissa's murder was planned and deliberate. But perhaps the largest reason was due to his never revealing a motive and not showing appropriate remorse for his actions in the 29 years of incarceration.
Yeah.
The board surmised that the level of planning, brutality of the crime, and complete disregard for human life, coupled with Hodge never offering an explanation for his actions, outweighed any level of rehabilitative programs that he'd performed in prison.
Mm-hmm.
The Herstrums also believed that the outpouring of support that the community showed from the letter-writing campaign was a large factor in the parole board's decision. Jeffrey Hodge will be eligible for parole again in 2031, which as of the airing of this episode is about 5 years.
I have a sneaking suspicion he will not get parole again.
I would agree, unless he does show remorse and reveals a motive in that time. That's the only way it's possible, but even then, I think it's far-fetched.
Okay.
But while over a decade in between his parole hearings may seem like a long time, for the Herstrums and those who loved Melissa, that time will go by in the blink of an eye, and they will have to relive her murder all over again. While I sincerely hope that Jeffrey Hodge is working on rehabilitating and feeling remorseful for his actions, I also hope that the Herstrums won't have to relive their daughter's murder over and over to keep someone in prison who is a clear danger to society. Time will tell, and we will certainly be keeping our eye on this case. Thank you again to our listener, Matt, for this suggestion. We look forward to covering more of your case suggestions in our next episode. Thank you so much for listening, and we hope you will join us on the next episode of Campus Killings. Before we go today, if you'd like to support Campus Killings, consider subscribing to the show with an AbJack Insider subscription through Apple Podcasts.
Your subscription will get you VIP access to all the shows on the network that not only includes hundreds of episodes of ad-free listening, but also bonus content and early access to episodes.
For only $4.99 a month or $49.99 a year, you'll unlock a variety of listener benefits, and you'll be supporting this show in the process.
Head over to Apple Podcasts and search for either Campus Killings or AbJack, and you can start your subscription with a free trial.
Your support is greatly appreciated.
Campus Killings is hosted by Dr. Meghan Sachs and Dr. Amy Shlosberg, with research and writing by Abagail Belcastro. It's produced by Mike Morford of AbJack Entertainment. Be sure to follow Campus Killings on social media. You can find Campus Killings on Twitter with the handle @CampusKillings or on Facebook at facebook.com/Campus Killings. You can also visit the show's homepage at campuskillings.com. Be sure to tune in every other Saturday for new episodes of Campus Killings.